Okay, I will begin. Good evening. My name is Ashok Kamath. I am the secretary of the IIT Alumni Center, Bengaluru. And welcome to all to this webinar. Many of you have been watching our webinars since April 2020 when the COVID-induced lockdowns were introduced. We found this very useful to reach out to many aspiring engineers, fellow alumni, people from industry and the academic world, and gain from this. So we've had many diverse topics across our, over 24 webinars that we've hosted till date. Today is a topic that is of immense importance, and I cannot emphasize this enough. It's a hugely important topic for the Indian economy as a whole. It's manufacturing. If we are to anyway be within sight of the $5 trillion aspiration that we have by 2025, we have to pay huge amount of attention to the manufacturing activity. And we are fortunate that today we have somebody who's not just talked about it, but has put this into practice. I'm delighted to introduce Mr. Baba Kalyani, the chairman of the Kalyani Group, the $3 billion group. Mr. Kalyani is a graduate of BITS Pilani, but we will not hold that against him. And he went out to MIT to do his master's. And upon his return over the years, he has exhibited leadership in many areas. He's on the Prime Minister's Science, Technology and Innovation Council. He's the co-chair of the India-Japan Business Leaders Forum, founding president of the Society for Indian Defense Manufacturers, chairman of the CII Manufacturing Council, and many other forums that he's really helped found and lead. Manufacturing was also a key part of the IIT industry conclave that IITACB hosted in February 2020, pre-lockdown, when we had a very large mix of people from both the academic world and industry talk about issues that are important. Moderating today is Professor Ashok Mishra. For all of us, there's no need to introduce him, but his life has spanned multiple IITs, a graduate of IIT Kanpur, taught for many years at IIT Delhi, was director of IIT Bombay, and chairman board of governors at IIT Roorkee, and currently a NASI distinguished fellow, a professor at the Indian Institute of Science here in Bangalore. Fellow of NASI, Indian National Academy of Engineers, founder president of the Polymer Processing Academy, and of course the founder president of the IITACB itself. Has been on the boards, is on the boards of Jubilant, Kirloskar, and the Higher Education Funding Agency, and in the past was on the boards of Reliance and many other companies. We will use our traditional format. Now it's become a tradition since we've done it for such a long time, where Mr. Kalyani will speak, and approximately 30 odd minutes into his talk, we will take a break to take questions from the audience and then repeat that cycle one more time. For all our attendees, please put your questions only in the Q&A box. There's also a chat box at the bottom, but those are not monitored for questions from the audience. So please put your questions only in the Q&A box. The chat box can be used for any other general comment that you may want, say hello to somebody, but use that. But Q&A, please ensure that it's up in the Q&A box. Finally, also like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Sushila Venkatraman, who at the end of this will do a wrap-up, a quick summary and a wrap-up of the proceedings today. With that, Mr. Kalyani, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Mr. Kamath, for the introduction. Professor Ashok Mishra, my good friend, Dr. Venkatraman, good evening to all the attendees from India, and good morning to attendees who are far away from here. and thank you for this opportunity. My subject today for the talk is based on AatmaNirbhar Bharat and priorities for the Indian manufacturing sector. I have kind of broken this topic into 4 parts. The first part is what are the global trends that impact future of manufacturing? I'll talk a little bit about this. And the second part is the efforts that the government of India has made to bring manufacturing and self-reliance to the center stage of the Indian economy and the Indian society. So after which we will take a break for any Q&A and then go on to the next 2 sections, which are largely based on what are the priorities to build a global scale Indian manufacturing sector, and some examples of what we do in our business, how we have used some of the things that I'm going to talk about in terms of creating new products and innovation. So let me just start with my first topic, global trends impacting future of manufacturing. As you all know that we are today working in an era which has a huge amount of changes in technology, changes in geopolitical systems, changes in terms of what is happening across the borders. And each nation, or many of the large nations, have reacted to this in their own way. So I've just given a small presentation in terms of what the United States started doing during the, not only in the Trump administration, but really started from the Obama administration. Of course, in the Trump administration, it became more noisy. You heard it a lot more often, and I'm sure that this will continue in the next administration. And that is largely to look at their own internal issues and how do you make America great again? How do you bring back manufacturing back into the US? And this is largely focused on maintaining the global supremacy that the United States has or have had in the manufacturing sector. Europe is focusing more on emerging technologies and largely on clean tech, largely on sustainability. Just two days ago, Germany and the UK passed a regulation which mandates electric vehicles by a certain year. So everything in that area is also moving in the area of technology. And the same surge in nationalism that you see in the US, you see there. Japan has taken a very different approach. As usual, they have started consolidating. That means they have started making their companies bigger and bigger by consolidating in each sector, thereby gaining scale. And their concept of Industry 4.0 or the 5G is what they call Society 5.0. And that is an overreaching concept that they have of digitizing their entire economy. China has a plan. I'll talk a little more in details. China 2025. Of course, in India, we have undertaken a lot of reforms and initiatives, and the biggest one being the AatmaNirbhar Bharat. A small country like Vietnam has suddenly come on the manufacturing platform on a global scale. And you see a lot of businesses that are moving out of China, moving into Vietnam, because they have created a policy environment that kind of encourages this. So we are in a highly volatile environment, which is driven by AI, by cybersecurity, e-mobility, digital manufacturing, robotics. I mean, you name all the new technologies, and you cannot move in manufacturing in the future without having a knowledge of this. There's a second part that is going to be important for manufacturing, and that is, doing manufacturing in a sustainable manner. And therefore, keeping track of the UN Sustainable Development Goals also becomes important. I think most companies would now be mandated to have in their annual report what their sustainability goals and improvements are in terms of CO2 emissions, in terms of waste, in terms of solid waste, liquid waste, etc. So, the whole problem with the COVID challenge that we have faced is the world is getting prepared that we don't have a next challenge on climate change coming. You talk about China. China made this announcement of Made in China 2025. They have announced 10 areas where they want to have global dominance. And it's very frightening if you look at these areas, that if they have global dominance in these 10 areas, then I think, the world will be a very difficult place. But that is their goals and their targets. And to create global dominance, they have created a concept of creating national champions in each one of these areas. And they are working in this. And from what we have seen in the past, when China puts a target, they really go after it and they really achieve it. Unlike the experience that we have in India. We've also had targets 15 years ago, but we never were able to achieve any one of them. And I will discuss this a little further in my other slides. Now, this is a very interesting area. The largest manufacturing sector in the world is connected to the automotive industry. Whether it's the manufacture of automobiles or, whether it's cars, whether it's trucks, whether it's two-wheelers, whether it's agricultural equipment, anything that moves, we would call it broadly automotive or automobile. Now look at the disruption that has happened in this industry. And this disruption is moving into its supply chain, which is extremely large. If you look at the value of the automobile industry, you can see for yourself here, there are numbers in billions of dollars in terms of turnover. You have companies like Toyota and Volkswagen that are in excess of $270 billion of annual revenue. And then you have a little company called Tesla that is $25 billion in annual revenue. But that has a valuation in the market that is almost dizzying levels. And what is this because of? And this is simply because the technology disruption that they created in a vehicle that moves, in terms of creating a platform that gives you infotainment, connectivity, autonomous systems, and which changes almost every day with programming. And this is something which has caused a major disruption. It's not just electric vehicles. Everybody in this system can make electric vehicles. GM used to make electric vehicles back in the 60s. They had a Chevy Volt in the 60s, which was full electric. But look at where GM stands today, although it sells a lot more vehicles than what Tesla sells. But look at the way the market values these companies. And this is one major disruption that is going to come in many, many sectors of the manufacturing industry, because anything that is non-digital has low value. Anything that is digital and uses digital technology and new technology has high value. And that's the basic disruption that we are seeing. Most governments and most large companies in the United States, Europe, China want to be at the forefront of this. China has already taken a lead, as you know, in electric vehicles, and therefore the supply chain in electric vehicles, whether it's battery technology or whether it's all the other supply chain, and now the rest of the world is planning to catch up. But the fact of the matter here is Tesla is almost one generation ahead. I mean, a decade ahead in terms of technology because of the software and the battery technology that they created. So this is a very, very major disruption. And you have examples of this kind of disruption in almost every manufacturing sector. But this being the largest manufacturing sector, I thought, would give an example of what this means. Now we come to the COVID-19 pandemic. This is, as we talk about this for the last almost 9 months, 10 months, we have come to realize the impact of this pandemic on a global basis. We now have a second wave in most of the parts of the world. The United States, Europe, almost all countries in Europe, and we are now beginning to see the same thing in India post Diwali. I just hope that the second wave is not as disruptive as the first one, but clearly it has set a new normal in terms of how we work, in terms of how we look at business, how we look at managing our business. And one of the things that it has done, I mean, one of the advantages that this has, this bad news of pandemic created, at least here, that a lot of new innovations, and especially for Indian companies and Indian businesses, we were very quickly able to move to a digital format of working because that was the only way we could work. And if we had planned that Indian business would become digital, it would have probably taken us 5 or 6 years. But I think in less than 6 months, almost every business in India works in a digital format. And that's something that's some good that has come out of this. But clearly, this has created a huge amount of problems in terms of the global recession, in terms of the shrinking GDP almost in every nation. And obviously, we have to find our way through this problem, through this whole global reset. If you look back at history, history always tells you that the best innovations always come in a crisis. The last time there was a pandemic was 1918, when the Spanish flu happened. And that created a global flu pandemic. But the innovations that came in the next 10, 15 years after 1918, after the 20s, kind of kept the world economy going for the next 50, 60 years at a very fast pace. And I believe that the same thing is likely to happen now. All the best innovations in terms of digital, in terms of doing business in a new way, in terms of how do we manufacture, how do we communicate, how do we produce products. All this is going to be very different with the technology that is going to be available in the digital format. If you look at our own case in India, the COVID-19 also, we saw some tremendous amount of success in India on the fight against COVID-19. It brought together all the top scientists, the doctors, the government, the academicians, the Indian industry, for a national effort to create a lot of products and things that we needed to deal with this COVID-19. And just a few examples, we didn't have test kits for the RT-PCR test. We now have a capacity to make 1 billion test kits in manufacturing capacity. We are now exporting test kits to Latin America, Africa, Asia, Eastern Europe. And I think this is something for which we have to be thankful and grateful to the Honorable Prime Minister, to the scientific advisor, Dr. Vijay Raghavan, to NITI Aayog, for MCIR, CSIR, the Department of Biotechnology, all the people who kind of came together to produce solutions. And the solutions were done in months or days sometimes. The same thing happened with the PPE kits. We didn't have any manufacturing of PPE kits before the pandemic breakthrough. And now we produce 5 lakh PPE kits per day, exporting PPE kits to the neighboring countries. And as the vaccine news, good news is coming out, India is gearing up to manufacture this vaccine in a very, very large capacity. So I think the bottom line here is that in times of crisis, even we, with all our problems of regulation and control and everything else, if we put our hearts and mind to things, we can make fast changes happen when they are required. And I think this is something where we were able to break as a nation all the silos that operate. And because the silos were broken and everybody was working in a mission mode under the direction of the Prime Minister and all the other areas that I mentioned, we were able to see some very, very rapid advancement that were happening. And I think a lot of this understanding, a lot of this success that has come is now going to be used in other sectors, especially in the manufacturing sector, to create what the Prime Minister calls the AatmaNirbhar Bharat Abhiyaan. I'll come to now the second section, which is basically what has the government done to bring manufacturing sector and self-reliance to the center stage of the Indian economy. I think this is extremely important to understand, because the manufacturing sector and its growth was being talked about right from 2008. It is nothing very new. Even during the previous government, we had a Make in India program and a manufacturing and a plan to bring manufacturing to 25% of India's GDP. But somehow we were not able to make that happen. When Prime Minister Modi came into office in 2014, we started with the Make in India program in December 2014. And thereon, several reforms have taken place from the government to build a very robust ecosystem to allow this sector to grow. And let me just share with you some of those things that are going on in this sector. First of all, unfortunately, our manufacturing sector has shrunk this year. Last year was 16%, now it's 15% of our GDP. In terms of value add, and share of our exports is less than 2% of total world exports. The major factors that have impacted Indian manufacturing in terms of external factors are the FTAs that we have signed, I would say sometimes recklessly in the past 10, 15 years. The non-tariff barriers that other countries put, and of course, huge competition coming out of China and other countries in overseas markets. Internally, the biggest problem we have is the high cost of doing business. And this is largely connected to land, labor, and power reforms. It's still very difficult to get land. Labor regulations are difficult. And utilities, power, ecosystem for transportation is just too expensive. The second part has been in terms of our own intellectual property, creating technology, skilling of our ecosystem, especially for the small and medium enterprises. And these are the areas that are being readdressed today with a new approach. And I personally believe that we will start seeing some results coming out of this. If you look at India's growth in the manufacturing sector for the past many years, you will see that from 2002 to 2011, we had a pretty high growth period. Our GDP grew quite fast. But what we failed to realize, and we realize this now, is most of that growth came because of imports of large amount of capital goods and consumption products. So all the high technology products we were importing because we had no manufacturing capabilities for this product. Now, if at that time we had exercised the kind of policies that the government is exercising today, we could have taken advantage of this opportunity of high growth and created a manufacturing sector that would have been very, very handy today and would have taken India to a different level. As you can see, a six-fold increase in imports over the previous decade, in that decade, a nine-fold rise in imports of capital goods. So this is the big opportunity where growth was high, but we managed our growth only by helping other countries from whom we were importing. And that was capital goods, that was defense products, that was everything that had technology we were importing. And at the same time, China grew its domestic industry. And that's how the Chinese economy and manufacturing sector grew very dramatically from the year 2000 till now, in the last 20 years. The many structural reforms that the government has created, first 2014-15 largely was supply side interventions in terms of ease of doing business, liberalizing the FDIs. The biggest structural reform was the GST and bankruptcy code. Of course, they created the Skilling India, Digital India, Startup India, which has become extremely successful. And of course, a lot of things for growing the MSME sector. Today, in the last 2 years, we see a lot of demand side initiatives that are taking place. The whole Make in India program, import substitution, the whole focus on producing your own products in the area of defense, hardware, electronics, mining, the big jump on space programs, the big jump in creating a large renewable energy capacity. Almost, I heard the Prime Minister talk today at the Deen Dayal University convocation, where the target is to create a 400 gigawatt renewable energy capacity in India. And of course, in the area of medical technology, biomedical technology. So we have things like the public procurement order, which mandates anything that the government buys to be bought from Indian companies, if Indian companies can make them. We have the National Infrastructure Pipeline, which is $1 trillion program to build the infrastructure, roads, ports, airports, etc. And we have, in the last few weeks, a big thrust on agricultural reforms and labor reforms. A lot of agricultural reforms are also focused on using technology in agriculture, whether it is digital technology, whether it's technology for storage, whether it's technology for processing, and everything else. Everything is focused on using technology. And in the healthcare, we have the biggest healthcare program, the AatmaNirbhar Bharat program, which was launched by the Prime Minister last year. And I think this has started to become pretty effective in terms of its impact on the citizens. Going forward, we have announced Self-Reliant India and AatmaNirbhar Bharat program. We have set ourselves a goal to get the Indian economy to a $5 trillion GDP. And if you look at the manufacturing sector, the goal for that is to go to $1 trillion in manufacturing value addition. And self-reliant in strategic sectors, mainly defense, aerospace, electronics, and high technology sectors. So it's a good pathway that has been created. Of course, unfortunately, the COVID shock has kind of disrupted a lot of plans, because all the attention today is on dealing with the COVID shock, dealing with the second resurgence of COVID, and providing healthcare to the citizens. But I'm sure that moving forward, we will see India jumping back to a growth path and moving in the direction that has been set for creating an AatmaNirbhar Bharat. When you look at AatmaNirbhar Bharat, as has been said many times by the Honorable Prime Minister, it's a mission that for converting crisis into an opportunity. It's a national agenda to strengthen India's capabilities in strategic sectors. Strategic sectors are largely defense, aerospace, the space sector, the atomic energy, transportation sector, etc. And to create scale in many of the strategic sectors where India has a competitive advantage. So you take pharmaceuticals, you take auto and auto components, textile and apparels, and the recently added electronics. A lot of focus now going on electronic manufacturing. And to make this happen, the government has now announced a performance-linked incentive scheme. This is, I think, a very, very good scheme to incentivize higher production. And it's almost a about turn in terms of the highly regulated license raj that we had in the 70s and the 80s to create a domestically vibrant manufacturing sector. You heard the word vocal for local many times. And I think the basic ambition of vocal for local is for all Indians, every Indian, all the 1.3 billion Indians to understand that they need to participate with their heart in creating a new India, creating an AatmaNirbhar India, creating a self-reliant India. And this has to be the goal for all of us. And for all businesses, for all individuals, no matter which field and which area you work in. And the way it is going to be achieved is that we create self-sufficiency in technology, in innovation, and in talent. And I'll talk about this a little later when we come to the other sections. The champion sectors of the AatmaNirbhar Bharat, taking Indian manufacturing from 300 or 400 billion to a trillion, are the sectors that are shown here in the slides. And there are many sub-sectors. So it is not just manufacturing of automotive or pharmaceuticals. We are even looking at simple things like agri-products, things like footwear. There are areas in India where different products have large capability in terms of skill sets. Now, if you can just enlarge those skill sets, create scale, and create a enabling process for them to reach markets, these industries can grow extremely fast and really get world scale. So leather, footwear, sporting goods, textiles, toys. I mean, we don't normally consider this as industry, but this can be very, very large industries going forward. Furniture, for example. Of course, the conventional industries like automotive, auto components, pharmaceuticals, chemicals industry, and of course, electronic sector that has a large domestic market and can also create a large export market as we move forward. These are some of the examples of the good things that have happened within the country. We now have our own indigenously produced fighter jet, the Tejas LCA. We have indigenous artillery guns, ATAGs, that are being produced in the industry in India. We have a higher speed trains, the Vande Bharat Express. We have a large national infrastructure pipeline. If you see the road building activity that is going on in India, it is quite dramatic. And I think when transportation becomes easier and faster, it also generates a lot of economic growth. And on the space side, we have the Chandrayaan-2 mission, India on moon by 2022. And of course, we have the Gaganyaan manned mission to space that is going to follow. So a lot of exciting things happening where we have seen success. So I think going forward, we just need to build on this success and do more things in the strategic sectors. These are some of the areas where a lot of focus has been put. Swachh Bharat, Untitled Bharat Abhiyaans. I mean, nobody would have thought that something like a Swachh Bharat Abhiyaan that the Prime Minister started talking. I mean, almost every program on his Man Ki Baat, he talks about Swachh Bharat. and the impact that it has had in our society in terms of cleaning up our cities, our villages, our putting better habits to our people. It's just incredible. And more than anything else, today this has also become a large business proposition. This is a huge, I'm told something like a 80,000 crore business opportunity per year. Same thing with precision agriculture. We're using technology to improve agriculture, agricultural processing. A lot of work now going on electric mobility. A new scheme that has been announced on electronics, manufacturing and assembly. This is one area where we missed the bus in the early 80s, where there was a big opportunity for India to become like China in electronics. We somehow missed the bus out there, and we missed the electronics revolution. And I think the government is doing a lot of work in getting large investments in electronics, right from semiconductors to manufacturing smartphones and everything else in between. So we hope that in the next few years, we will see a lot of activity in electronics. This is also an area where manufacturing of electronic products has an importance in all our strategic sectors, whether it is defense, whether it is space, whether it's automotive. I mean, everything has electronics in it, and everything has embedded software, everything has digital technology. So this becomes extremely important. There are two new things that are going on. We have a lot of work that is going on deep ocean missions. So a lot of new technologies that are getting developed for building equipment that can go deep in the ocean, and of course, use of artificial intelligence. And these programs give a huge new opportunity for manufacturing, which today the manufacturing sector doesn't look at. So I think there is a lot of work that is going on in these ministries from the government. A lot of industry started at least getting inquisitive about this area, and I'm sure we will see more and more people looking at this as an opportunity in the manufacturing sector. There's a lot of work going on science and technology for the future. This is just in terms of reference. There are programs on high energy physics, accelerator-based science and technology programs, nuclear physics programs, astronomy and astrophysics programs, ecology and environmental science, this is newly added, and climate change newly added. And I think this is very important because the COVID-19 gave us a major shock when the pandemic came. Nobody realized the amount of damage a simple virus like this can do to a nation and to the planet. And therefore, we better be prepared for the climate change related issues, because that can also do a major damage to the planet and to India as a nation if we're not careful about it. So I'm glad that the government has taken this seriously, and there are active programs that are going on in dealing with climate change and creating people with capability and talent to deal with this situation. So, Ashok, I will stop here, and we can take a break for any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for such an insightful presentation so far, and I'm sure it will continue. A couple of my own questions, and I'm sure other people will feel the same way. You mentioned that India puts goals and targets, and we miss them. What needs to be done in the country to make sure that all those targets are met? Because we've said so many things we'll do, 10 years ago, and they're still not done. Or 15 years is an example again.
We had, even in the previous government in 2005, 2006, we had set up a manufacturing mission target of creating a manufacturing sector that is 25% of GDP. There was a target to create a defense sector that is not import dependent, and we manufacture things within the country. There were a lot of reports written and put in. The problem is, it just gets lost in our system in terms of implementation, because none of these things get onto a mission mode. What is happening today, and one of the things that the COVID-19 has taught us, is that you get onto a mission mode, you can make things happen. We have the talent, we have the bandwidth, we have the people, we have the capability. We have to break silos. If we don't break silos, it will not happen. And I think we have learned how to break silos in the response that we generated between March and let's say August, September, in dealing with the COVID problem. And I think that's been a great learning for India.
So also you mentioned about the last pandemic and so many new things came up, innovations after the 2020s and so on. What innovations of high value that you would expect or you would like to see happen post-COVID? Let's say COVID goes away in 2021, 22, whatever.
But first of all, I look at 3 or 4 things. One is, I think as a country, we need to move away from an economy that is factor-driven to an economy that is innovation-driven. So we have to look at where all can we innovate. Now we have some basic areas for innovation. We have a large population. So, a large portion of the population is dependent on agriculture. We need to innovate in agriculture using technology. We need to innovate in healthcare using technology. We don't make any of our healthcare major equipment, all our CT scans, MRI equipment, ultrasound, you name it, they come from Siemens or Philips or GE or somewhere. Okay. Probably designed by Indian engineers sitting in Bangalore. But, we don't manufacture them. And we have to get out of this mentality. We have to, we can't be just good at doing designs of bits and pieces. We have smart engineers. Now, somebody has to say that, okay, I'm going to make things. And the system has to say that, okay, I will accept what is made in India. And this is exactly what the government of India has done, what the Prime Minister has done, that they have mandated to buy India. The whole program for vocal for local is based on this.
Yeah, so I personally strongly believe that any nation to go forward, science is the base, and then innovations and inventions are the base. You look at any advanced country, these are the things which grew there first: science, and then innovations, and then followed by high technology. When we have been talking about innovation so much in the country, what needs to be done in terms of, let's leave the government out of it. Let's just go the academic and the industrial leaders. What do they need to do to make this happen? Because, government can only talk and give you a direction.
I'll give you, unfortunately, it's very difficult to leave government out of anything because it's a overarching force or system. But I will answer your question in a slightly different manner. If you look at the United States, how did the United States become a superpower? In 1939, when the World War II just started, with Hitler forming the axis of evil between Germany, Italy, and Japan, American soldiers were riding on a horseback. Okay. And in 1944, they created a nuclear fission. So from horseback to nuclear fission, they went in 5 years. And obviously it happened because of what you just talked about, science and technology. But there was another element to it. President Truman called 2 gentlemen. One was William Knudsen, who was the president of General Motors at that time in Detroit. Another one was a shipping magnate in California. And he called them and he said, I want you to build a defense industry in the United States. And they roped in over 100 companies, all private companies. And in 4.5 years, they built equipments not only for themselves, but for France, and England. And I'll just rattle off some numbers. They built 385,000 aircrafts, 170 per day. Something like 200,000 tanks. Yeah, there's a book on this called Freedom Forge. And this is what made America into a superpower. That one decision of President Roosevelt calling these two gentlemen and telling them that come and work for me for $1 a year. So Bill Knudsen, Henry Kaiser were the two guys who created the United States defense industry. And the amount of stuff that they produced in that period was worth $185 billion. On today's value term, this close to almost $3 trillion.
Amazing.
And just look at the number of things that they produced. Yes. 203 submarines in 4-5 years.
My goodness, and we take that many years to maybe make one or two.
So this is what, and it all happened because there were these people, all these businessmen, these executives, they thought they need to do this for the nation. So a very patriotic feeling.
So it can happen if I believe with the industry and academics come together.
Absolutely.
With the support of the. All right. One other question would be, we talked about skill development, or there was a question about that. There's a lot of buzz about it in the last few years. And we said we'll do skill development in India and so on and so forth. Have we reached there? If not, what is lacking?
Actually, I have something, I'm going to talk about that going forward, okay. But I will just tell two things. First of all, our whole skill development program in the last 7-8 years was based on improving our ITIs. Mm-hmm. The whole focus was on that kind of stuff. And I think nobody realized that technology is moving much faster than improving ITS. I mean, today you have IoT, you have Industry 4.0, you have everything digital. And tomorrow, you don't need anybody to program a CNC machine. You will do it by talking to the machine, by using cognitive technology. Mm-hmm. So, technology is moving at a much faster speed than the physical skill development work that we are doing. So our skill development now needs to happen in very different areas. We need to create thousands of engineers who understand digital technology. We need to create thousands of people who understand artificial intelligence, who understand, we need to create data scientists. There's such a big shortage of this kind of people and talent in the world. And whatever we have is kind of moving out of India. And that's something we need to stop and bring back here. And that's the skill development that we really need to do.
Good. We'll take other questions. A lot of questions. I'll try to assimilate them. But one last one before you go to the next part is, in the defense sector, I think this AatmaNirbhar thing is going to be the most important because you have to buy technology for defense purposes. It takes a long time to develop. What do we need to do in India to take it fast forward?
You didn't need to do anything. The services have to simply say, we're going to buy Indian products. And fortunately, the government has put a policy in place that there are some 101 items that can't be imported from 1st of January.
Oh, good. Okay. All right. So if you would continue with your.
Yeah. So I'll move to the next part of my talk. The next part of my talk is, first one is priorities to build a global scale Indian manufacturing sector. And I'll talk about how we need to transform from an economy that is really based on low wages and no innovation to an economy that is driven by innovation. So if you look at this chart, it basically tells you that this is from 2018, but nothing much has changed between 2018 and now. We are at about 15% or 14% now in terms of manufacturing sector's percentage to GDP. And when you are so low in terms of manufacturing to GDP, you know, it is almost equivalent of saying that you are not innovation driven. You don't innovate new products. You don't do things that create increased manufacturing capability. Even Bangladesh and Philippines is ahead of us in terms of their share of manufacturing to GDP. And what we really need to do is to go to India 2030, where we are closer to 30%, or at least maybe a little lower, 25% of GDP to be a innovation-driven economy. And how do we do innovation? We can only do innovation provided we work with our educational institutions, our scientific institutions. We have a lot of science and technology institutions and institutions of higher learning in India. I mean, all the IITs, all the CSIR labs, all the other technological institutes, all the defense labs. I mean, there are just a lot of them. And we just need to find ways to be able to get them out of their silos and work with India. And India needs to learn to work with them. And this is something that is required, required to be done extremely fast to get ourselves to innovation driven. I mean, if you look at companies today, whichever companies in India have focused on creating innovation, they are doing extremely well. I mean, pharma sector is a good example in India of how innovation has created a huge pharma sector. One of the missing links in that pharma sector is the API, the manufacturing of APIs in India. And I don't know whether you are aware of this, but we used to make APIs in India in the 70s and 80s. Matter of fact, we had a big plant here in Pune owned by the government to make APIs. And we shut down the API plants and we said it's too expensive and let's buy from China or let's buy from outside. So we actually shut down a lot of our capabilities that we had in terms of high technology manufacturing, and we just need to bring them back. It's not that we couldn't do it, we just need to bring them back. You know, Philips used to make electronic components in Pune in a big way in the 80s. They had to shut their plant down because we started importing everything. This whole era where imports became the norm kind of destroyed the Indian manufacturing sector. This is just an example. You know, the US ambassador handed 100 high-end ventilators to India in June 2020. Even today, we can't make high-end ventilators. We make ventilators, but low-end ventilators. We are still not able to produce high-end ventilators. We're not able to produce, medical equipment. So there's a lot of things that we need to do, and we need to innovate. And a lot of this innovation, whether it's ventilators, whether it's medical devices, it's not the hardware side. It is all the digital side of it. It is all the embedded electronics. It is all the digital software, people who can do these kind of things. And we have a lot of them, but all of them are out of India. We don't have many of them here. So what we need to do is to create a talent factory in the IITs, in the institutions of higher learning, where we can churn out thousands and thousands of such people with this talent. And that is where how we the areas in red are the areas where we have zero or hardly any capability. And this is where the government has started focusing now in terms of how do we create capability in these sectors. Defense equipment, aerospace products, this is one of the areas. We still don't make a turbine engine of our own. We have to import all the jet engines that go into our fighter planes or any other aircraft. We don't make any medical equipment of our own. We don't make any semiconductors. Our electronic imports is now crossing $100 billion a year. So look at the opportunity that is available in the manufacturing sector if somebody applies their minds in this area. Next. This is a critical area, a critical subject. A world over, the whole industrial base, I gave the example of the United States in World War II. The whole industrial base of United States and how United States became a superpower was just happened in that 5-6 years. It created a huge industrial base for defense products. Now, defense and aerospace is the most important part of areas where India needs to become self-sufficient in manufacturing. Because that is where you use the highest technology, that is where the technology changes happen very fast. And if you can create an ecosystem between our technical educational institutes, between our scientific laboratories, and between the private sector industries in India, in this sector, as is being now planned, we will see a huge, huge change in the way our self-sufficiency happens in this sector. This is a large sector, almost requires, in the defense sector, requires $26 billion worth of equipment by 2025. And a lot of strategic policy changes have been made to bring synergy between defense procurement and defense production, to create self-reliance in critical weapon systems, to attain strategic independence, and to also start creating a major thrust on defense exports. There is a huge program going on between the Ministry of Defense and the industry, both public and private, in terms of exporting defense products. So you will see in the next 5 years a big growth in this sector, and that will create a big technological push which will help the other manufacturing sectors within the country. We need to create this ecosystem. You talked about this, Ashok, in your question, but we need to create an ecosystem that works very closely between the government, industry, and academia. To largely invest in research and development and innovation, to develop your own intellectual property, invest in skilling and reskilling, but skilling and reskilling for higher end skills, because that is what is going to be required, and create jobs in frontier technology. Now, let me just give a few examples in this area. As I had said earlier, if you looked at UK, they created this clusters with universities and industry. In the United States, they created similar clusters by a different name. In the UK, they call it Catapult. In the US, they call it something else. In Germany, you have these Fraunhofer institutes, which have huge number of labs, work independently between funded partially by government, partially by industry, but working in specific sectors to create the science and technology that you need for the future. Whether it's in, Fraunhofer even works in the medical side of stuff and works in even automotive side of stuff. So they're pretty wide range of things that they do. And similarly, in other countries, they have their own ecosystem. Now, we have an ecosystem, but that ecosystem is not connected. So we need to connect it. And there is a big move that's going on from the Prime Minister, Science, Technology and Innovation Council to CSIR, to DRDO, to all the other major institutions, and with academia like the IITs, of connecting this ecosystem and creating a enabling ecosystem to make to create new technologies, to make new products, and to be on the top end of most of the things that we want to do. And I think this is the most important part. If we can achieve this in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, then I think there is no looking back for Indian manufacturing in the world that is going to face us. This is some of the enabling systems that are being created by the Prime Minister's, the the PS's office in establishing technology and science clusters. There are 4 of them today in Delhi NCR, in Bangalore, in Pune, and in Hyderabad. And basically, each one of the clusters has the ecosystem of the industry there, the R&D labs there, and the educational institutions there, all connected together with some very important deliverables that need to be done. So this is, I hope things like this will now start working, and we will start seeing a combination of all the forces to create the technology, the science, and the innovation that we need to create a very vibrant manufacturing sector, not only for large companies, but largely for the medium and small companies and startups. And this is extremely important because no manufacturing sector can survive without its supply-based support system from the medium and small companies and startup companies now. The startup companies provide all the new understanding of technology which most brick and mortar companies don't have. And therefore, connecting them becomes very, very important. And I think these clusters will do the job of connecting them. We need many more clusters. This is, I think, this is a beginning that has been made this year. So there is a framework that is now available for these clusters. And this is one of the big initiatives, I think, from the government to start getting ourselves as a nation working on creating innovation and technology. One of the big differences between, I put this slide only to put a challenge in front of all of you and our listeners, hopefully from all the IITs. One of the big challenges, a difference between the Silicon Valley in the United States and, let's say, the Bangalore Silicon Valley, just to give an example, is I think we have in both areas highly capable talent. We have an ecosystem of advanced technical knowledge. There is high-end technology and research. But the one thing that is missing is the Silicon Valley in the US has the capability to make products and make products fast. Whereas in India, we seem to be satisfied in just designing products and not making them. So somehow, if we can move from designing products to making products, and of course, the Silicon Valley in the US had a big support from the DoD of the United States in the 50s and 60s to create this kind of capability. So we need to move ourselves from just designing and being in a design and R&D ecosystem to manufacturing and product-based ecosystem. And that is the big change that is required to be done at the talent level, at the institutional level, at the R&D level. I'll just give 3 examples. You know, we talk about Hypersonic Engines. This is a company that was founded in California by a team of young engineers who worked in the space launch technology. And in 2 years, they developed an engine that runs at Mach 5 speed, hypersonic speed. Now, if we can do this in India in 2 years, then we would have, we can beat the rest of the world anytime. And I can't see why we can't do this, because we have the talent, we have the capability. We just need to put this together to make this happen. This is another example of a group of people that came out of Rolls-Royce, and they built a small jet engine, 550 horsepower, and a small helicopter. They call it a personal luxurious helicopter, and they're going to fly in the next 2-3 years. Just examples of how people are innovating things on their own. So what do we really need to do? I think our top attention needs to go on retaining manufacturing talent and creating manufacturing talent. Create platforms to reverse the brain drain that has happened out of India. And this is really an important issue that all of us need to debate, especially the educational institute need to debate, there needs to be a lot of discussion on this point as to what is required for us to create the talent and retain the talent. We create the best talent, but we are not able to retain the talent. The talent just goes away. Most of our engineers don't want to work in the manufacturing sector. They want to work in the consulting sector. They want to work in, in the financial sector. So how do we change this to accelerate India's manufacturing? This is a big, big problem that we have and we need to solve. So this is something which, Professor Mishra and Mr. Kamath and all of you in IITs, you need to ponder upon and figure out how this needs to be done. But this is number one item on the manufacturing list agenda of what to do. The number two item is, how do we create speed in doing things? We talked a little while ago about why things don't happen in India. We make plans, and Manmohan Singh created a Make in India plan way back in 2011 with the same targets, but we were just not able to implement it. We put the best policies for SEZs and for defense sector to become private, but with their the UPA government's multiple political environment, they were not able to implement any of these things. But you look at Tesla. Tesla was able to build their gigafactory in 168 days. Tell me one place in India where we can build this size factory in 168 days. And they are doing the same thing now in Germany, in Berlin. So speed is the most important thing. How do we create speed in whatever we do? Because if we don't create speed and we end up with speed breakers in front of us, all our energy and then all our resources go into dealing with speed breakers other than building things. So I think that's a big about turn that we need to make. And here, of course, the government comes into play more at the state level rather than at the central level. And I hope there will be some changes happening in this sector. I'll talk a little bit about, since we're running out of time almost, a little bit about what we are doing in our company. We have focused a lot in the last 15, 20 years on skilling, but we have focused largely on high-level skills. So how do we make engineers out of people who are not engineers? How do we make them, in terms of MTechs? And how do we create a lot of new technology development using institutions within India, outside India, etc. So we do this a lot. We have almost 10% of our workforce in training at any given time. That was pre-COVID. COVID has kind of put a stop to this, unfortunately. We have also focused a lot on technology and research, almost for the last 15 odd years. Our basic business depends on metallurgy and metallurgical knowledge. So we have a rich repository of metallurgical knowledge in terms of people, in terms of talent. We have more than 200 researchers, PhDs, MTechs. Many of them, Ashok, came from IIT Hawaii, as you know. We file a lot of patents, and we have created a structure where we do applied research. We don't do any basic research, but our applied research to convert into products, we have created a center for manufacturing innovation. So that kind of makes it into products. So we have the ability to test our research and technology knowledge into products and understand what works and what doesn't work. And that has given us a very, very good capability in making a lot of new things. And this is what we have used largely to make a lot of products for the defense and aerospace sector. So we have everything from 3D manufacturing to laser to electron beam I mean, all kinds of stuff that you can see in any modern research facility in the world. Go to the next. We also have a center in Bangalore where we are working on jet propulsion. They already built a small jet engine from ground up using computer analytics and actually manufacturing. We have similar center in Hyderabad for tactical systems to make seekers. So we are investing a lot of money in creating high-end talent to make products for the future. We're also working on ventilators. We did a program with Stanford University, and this ventilator is almost ready. It's a very, very high-end ICU ventilator. And we also joined hands with NASA Jet Propulsion Lab, and they gave us the technology to make this vital ventilator, which is a pre-ICU ventilator. Both these units are now in pre-production stage. We have also done a lot of nurturing and working with startup ecosystem. So we have an active engagement and investments in many of these startups. There's a startup called Aeron that does work in inertial navigation. So we work with them. They are doing some work for our defense products in inertial navigation. Blackstraw is a startup, I wouldn't say startup, pretty good in advanced AI applications. So they are helping us with advanced AI work in vision intelligence to end-to-end solutions. There's another startup in Pune called Zeus Numerics, does a lot of ballistics computing. This is very useful for our artillery and defense-related area. We work with another startup called Cognit, natural language processing, using data science in applying machine learning to human learning with specific focus in building solutions for defense and homeland security. We work with a startup in Italy called Edge Lab. This is a small little startup with 10, 12 people, and they do undersea vehicle technologies and sensors. Then we have another startup, Eternus, which does composites. And then we have two startups in the electric vehicle area where we are working with. So we are connected with many startups, and I think we learn a lot from them. And that's how we are trying to integrate and create new products between our own innovation and the startups. So these are some of the products that we made. In 6 years, we have made almost 7 artillery platforms. The first one was designed with DRDO. The rest of them are all our own designs from scratch. We created a world record in terms of distance an artillery gun can fire. Normal firing range is 40 or 41 kilometers. Our gun fires almost 48 kilometers. We have developed and now supplying protected vehicles for the Indian Army that work at a height of almost 18,000 feet. This is something very unique. We are not a vehicle manufacturer, but it's something we have used all our engineering knowledge and skills to do. We have supplied vehicles to the United Nations for their armored personnel carriers. So this is something new where we are able to use our knowledge and make things happen. A small jet engine that we made in Bangalore. And, I just want to end this by saying that the whole concept of AatmaNirbhar Bharat mission, as has been echoed by our Honorable Prime Minister, has really kind of generated a lot of energy within our company, our employees at all levels. And they are working extremely hard to create capabilities in sectors where we didn't have capabilities. And defense and aerospace is one such sector. And I think this is what the 1.3 billion Indians have to do. I think a lot of them are now moving in this direction, and we will see a big change in India, hopefully post-COVID. Unfortunately, the COVID has kind of put a brake and a big speed breaker in our efforts, but hopefully going into 2021, we will see the Indian manufacturing sector, the industrial and technological capabilities in our strategic sector, the R&D and science and technology that our educational sector and research labs generate will all work together to create a, let's say, a self-reliant and AatmaNirbhar Bharat. Thank you and Jai Hind.
Thank you, Mr. Kalyani. As it turns out, some of the questions I was going to ask you, you addressed in your second part of the presentation. But let me start by saying Indian talent. I also agree with you that there is no dearth of talent in India, but they are not attracted to manufacturing industries. About the time that I graduated, people were going to manufacturing industries, but today that's not the case. What needs to be done? Do companies like yours need to go to the undergraduate students at IITs and show this excitement of manufacturing?
Yeah, trying to do that, Ashok, but without much success. So we do the second best thing that is available to us, and that is go to the next level of institutes and take their brightest students and put them through a training program that we have and create some excitement with them, especially in the area of digital technologies, in the area of IoTs. You know, nobody today, people coming out of top engineering school, they don't want to work on a dirty shop floor. So we have to create, industry has to create an environment which is, let's say, suitable. And somehow you people at the institutions have to create a little bit of push towards moving them to industry.
Yep. So in the last part of your presentation, you talked about startups, and one of the trends that we see amongst the IIT graduates is that they like to go to startups and so on. Would that be a way to attract talent? If they're doing startups, they're contributing to your growth, but in a different manner.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, these startups that I talked about, almost 4 of them are all IIT graduates.
Yep.
Some from IIT Kanpur, some from IIT Powai, some from IIT Delhi. So they're all 4 of them are IIT graduate startups, and it's a mutually great learning for both of us.
Yeah. What would your thoughts be on changing the education and training systems post-COVID at places like IITs and NITs and so on? Because I've been always saying that NITs should also aspire to reach that level of the IITs. Does the NEP, if you have looked at it, does that address this problem?
I think the programs that you have in IITs today are pretty good. I would not. Obviously, you keep them as technology changes. That I think is a normal process that goes on. Because our experience has been, we have had now almost something like 180 of our employees who went to IIT Powai and got their MTech and came back and joined our research group. And these vehicles that I talked about, these are all young engineers who have been able to build vehicles. There's a group who went to Ladakh and Leh with a UAV, because the Army wanted a UAV that operates at 15,000 feet and flies another 5,000 feet and carries 30 kilograms of load. And the problem with UAVs is the battery doesn't work beyond minus 25 today. Or, then you have to have a very different technology. And we sent a UAV, it worked very well for one day. There were 4 of our engineers, young ones, who did their MTech at IIT Powai, who were working in our labs. And they did a great job. So, there is just immense amount of talent and energy with these people if you give them opportunity.
Are there other examples in other manufacturing industries of?
Oh yeah, everywhere. I mean, every big manufacturing company is working in this direction. I mean, one of the things that has happened because of the COVID is you had to, by force, become digital. You didn't have a choice. So everything is now almost paperless.
Yeah. So one of the questions was the structural reforms that you mentioned about land and labor code, cost of capital, and so and the like. Do they need to go on a mission mode, or because that was the impediment that you mentioned in the beginning?
The labor reforms has now just come out. It's going to be taken up in the parliament in the winter session. So we will have to see how it goes through the parliament. But they are good reforms. The problem with many of these reforms is that they are both a federal subject as well as a state subject. So just making a change in the federal system and laws doesn't mean the reform will get enacted by the state. It's the state governments that also need to enact the same reforms. And many places, the state governments are reluctant to enact these reforms for political or other reasons. And that's where the real challenge is.
Mm-hmm. What's your opinion on and advice about the semiconductor manufacturing sector? It's not your core sector in your company, but you talked about it.
I think the government has put a very good incentive package to lure, or let's say bring in one or two large semiconductor manufacturing companies. And I have a feeling that they will succeed in doing so.
Yeah. Another question alluded to the fact that there are a lot of goods in India which are made in China and have flooded the market. Is there a good quality control on them?
Many of those products are very poor in quality.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is no, we don't have too many standards like the Western world has in terms of controlling quality. And I think the government has now put in a lot of new standards. They have also banned a lot of products that otherwise come in, because all that we are doing is, just diminishing our own manufacturing sector. So this whole vocal for local business, a lot of Diwali items were coming from China. So I think this year, Diwali, a lot less have come from China, I would say.
All right. Well, since we are at the IT Alumni Center and our focus is to try to enhance and bring together the industries together with the IITs for, like, we want to be the facilitators for such projects. So an example would be that something that, let's say, Bharat Forge wants to develop, but the expertise may be across several IITs. So we want to bring them together on a common platform. What would your thoughts and advice for us?
No, I think, Ashok, I think it's a great idea. There are many areas of technology where we need to work with several IITs, and we can't do it. The companies can't do this on their own. We have limited manpower, and it's very difficult to, and IITs are located in different places. So it's very difficult to physically travel, and with the COVID, you can't do this any which way. Right. So something like this at your place would work well. We can take a pilot project and work on it and see how we go. You can even rope in Indian Institute of Science. They have a lot of capability on technology and research in many areas, and take a pilot project and start.
Thank you so much. We'll be back. We'll get back to you on that and with other companies. So thank you once again for absolutely a delightful talk. We've been waiting for it for some time, but when it has come today, it's very illuminating.
Thank you.
Over to Sushila too. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Mr. Kalyani, thank you for this presentation, which, as one of our viewers very aptly described, exhilarating talk. So thank you very much for that. Ashok, as usual, thanks very much for bringing up some wonderful points and views. Let me just summarize what we've been through today. We started by looking at global trends, the changes that are taking place in technology, which are very, very rapid, geopolitics, nationalism and protectionism, which are taking different forms, the importance of sustainability, which has really come up again, even during the pandemic. It's kind of really thrown that whole issue up in a big way. Social changes that are taking place, and also the consolidation and scale that we're seeing happen at different levels. We also looked at what is happening in India, AatmaNirbhar Bharat, that of course is the theme of today's conversation. We are also seeing a lot of digital transformation, and we are seeing many reforms. So these were some key points that came up during the introduction. From a technological point of view, I think a few of the technologies that were highlighted and which are going to be very critical for every sector, but of course today's, again, the focus was really on the manufacturing sector, things like cybersecurity, robotics, AI, and so on, all of those. One of the examples that really stood out for me was when you talked about how Vietnam, just using policy changes, has been able to attract a lot of manufacturing from China. And that stands out pretty starkly because it tells us that there is an opportunity to do a lot just through policy. So when we include policy and we include all of the other action points that you put together today, it can be very, very powerful indeed. So the other things you talked about, manufacturing needs a good understanding of all of this, technology, skills, policy, all of that, and how all of everything comes together, but do it in a sustainable fashion. I would like to kind of switch a little further down your talk and talk about and kind of summarize the AatmaNirbhar Bharat idea. Self-reliance in strategic areas, defense, railways, atomic energy, and you listed a bunch of them. Self-sufficiency in critical technologies, and again, we did see a list of all of those. And very importantly, global scale, where we already have the capability for a global play. And that includes things like the automotive sector, textiles, pharma, and so on, where we already are playing. But how do we just expand all of that and really build global scale? I think the key point, though, while all that exists, the key point which Mr. Kalyani brought out today, and which even if we don't take anything else back, but just that one thing, it is that there are 1.2 billion of us. And if all of us simply shared that vision and said, what, from my point of view, what can I do to participate in that vision? Again, it can be so powerful, and nothing can, as you said, turn the clock back, and we will go forward. There is no other way. And again, the example that you gave of the US and what a small number of people were able to achieve just by putting a vision in front of themselves and sharing that. We have a lot of advantages. We can leverage a huge domestic demand. We have to increase our competitiveness and, very importantly, build global scale. And then we looked at action points. So how do we actually get there? And then that comes in the context of a whole new world, and that new world is a digital world. We've seen how quickly India has been able to adapt to the digital world just because of the pandemic. One of the other very big learnings that we've had from the pandemic is, in India, we are faulted for being very siloed, but the pandemic has taught us that it is possible, if we all put our hearts to it, to break down those silos and really rapidly rally around specific causes or specific outcomes. And we do a jolly good job of it. And then we looked at the reforms and what the government is doing. And the whole bunch of reforms around the supply side, which happened through 2014 and 2019. And then the demand side reforms that have been coming in. But again, key to this whole thing is that it's not just what is happening in the manufacturing sector alone, but also that the fact that it's all supplemented by many related areas like agricultural reforms, like Ayushman Bharat, labor reforms, etc. And why all of that needs to be taken in as a pot when we look at establishing India as a leader in manufacturing. Again, we've seen many recent successes, and I think we are all very proud of the Tejas and of all of the Chandrayaan and everything else. We're very proud of the fact that we do have the capability and we do have the challenge, the talent. There are opportunities everywhere, and one example was Swachh Bharat, and how Swachh Bharat then throws up many opportunities for new businesses, new business models, which didn't exist before. But the fact that we are all rallied behind Swachh Bharat has opened up a bunch of opportunities. The same thing holds whether you look at deep ocean research. Why on earth would one think of deep ocean research? Because it throws up a whole bunch of new technologies, and those technologies are applicable in many, many other areas. And this we've seen, historically, we've seen this happen with defense and everything else. So digital everywhere. So our skills must, at all levels, be capable of working with this digital world. And then we looked at science, and areas such as high energy physics and climate change and so on are all areas of focus, and they are critical and important for us going forward. Lastly, we looked at, finally, we looked at action areas, and I'll just list very briefly the skills factory in the IITs and other institutes of higher learning. Apart from design skills, we also need to really focus on manufacturing. So of course, the design skills exist, but how do we then move that into actually manufacturing, especially in the strategic areas? Self-sufficiency in the frontier technology areas, building our own IP, and we saw how Kalyani Group has been very, has by just focusing, been able to generate a lot of IP. Finally, unless there is an ecosystem that brings all this together, it's just a lot of point things, and that alone is not sufficient. But the most important thing is speed, and Mr. Kalyani emphasized that by saying speed, speed, speed. So that is going to be a critical point for all of us. And here it's not just about government, it's about all of us needing to think differently and needing to think at scale, at speed. And finally, he threw a challenge out at all of us. The examples, 2 examples that he gave us, and there are plenty of those out there, of Hermes and Hill helicopters. If those youngsters could achieve what they did in the short time, why can we not? When we have the skills and we have the talent and we have the capability, what is it that's stopping us from doing so? So those were very inspirational stories. So is the story of Kalyani Group and what has been the transformational journey that has been undertaken in the last few years. So there is nothing really that can stop us if we all simply subscribe and commit ourselves to that vision of AatmaNirbhar Bharat. So those were the key takeaways, at least for me. And so I want to thank you again for this wonderful session. And many of our viewers did come up with suggestions. They're good suggestions, and we will certainly kind of keep track of them as we go forward with IITACB's, as we look at what we can do to, as the IIT alumni and the center, what can we do to further the cause of this AatmaNirbhar Bharat. So once again, thank you all, and thanks for attending. Thanks for being with us. Thank you, and Jai Hind.
Thank you.